human beings had achieved an insanely high level of sophistication. What they had done in Egypt is still, to this day, one of the most confusing things that anyone's ever been able to accomplish. There's distinct evidence of a very advanced culture, and it exists all over the world.
Sacrifice, torment,
samurai sword practice,
and hygiene. Somehow it's all here.
Yeah, and none of it's good.
Nope. Let's get into it.
Ling Qi, usually translated to death by 1,000 cuts, was a form of execution in China dating back to the 10th century, and aside from how grim this was, it also held a much deeper meaning. If you were sentenced to die this way, it meant you'd messed up in the worst way. Ling Qi was reserved for crimes like treason, matricide, and patricide, or mass killing. The condemned would be tied to a wooden frame of some kind, usually in public, and then it's pretty much exactly what you'd imagine. They'd be cut over and over again until they eventually died. Sometimes the process would be drawn out, sometimes it would be a bit quicker. There aren't a lot of detailed historical records on the exact ways in which this would be practiced, so it would have varied quite a bit, depending on the crime and who was in charge. Not only would this have been a horrific way to go, it was also seen as incredibly humiliating, and on top of that, it was believed that those who died this way would suffer in the afterlife as well, with their bodies not being whole after death.
You think that's bad? Listen to this, because next on our list we have something called the BLOOD eagle, a ritualistic form of execution performed by ancient Vikings throughout the 8th, 9th, 10th, and 11th century. Rough time to be a Viking enemy. I'm warning you now, it's about to get graphic. The BLOOD eagle consisted of a person sitting upright and then having the skin on their back cut down the middle and peeled to either side, and then having their ribs severed from their spinal cord in the back with some kind of ancient blade that probably wasn't sharp enough to do the job very quickly, meaning the process most likely took hours. Once severed from the spine, the ribs would then be broken to be positioned outwards like wings coming out of the back of the body. The back skin on either side was then attached to hooks, the hooks to ropes, and the ropes to two large wooden poles on either side of the person so that the Vikings could properly and gruesomely display their sick, eagle-inspired abomination.
The Celts were often described as barbarians by the Romans. They were said to often rush into battle totally nude, they practiced strange rituals, and they had a real love of heads. Now, history is often written by the victor, so the Celts being these wild barbaric tribes may have been overstated, but there was some truth to what was written about them. Like the head thing, for example. Collecting heads as trophies is something a number of ancient civilizations practiced throughout time, but the Celts took things to a different level. They believed the soul was housed in the noggin, and liked using the human heads they lopped off in battle as decorative pieces. They'd hang them off their horses, they'd nail them to the walls, and decorate the fronts of their homes with them. Kind of like demented versions of Halloween decorations, only they weren't trying to be spooky. It was kind of like them putting their medals and trophies in their front lawns.
Next up we have the Mayans. Just as a whole, those guys were super twisted. Honestly, it's hard to even know where to start. As a society, the Mayans were super big on torment and sacrifice, often removing the heads or hearts of their enemies in drawn out ways that many times began with beatings, burnings, and scalpings in order to appease the gods. These sacrifices were often made when new buildings or leaders rose within the civilization, and they were great architects, so that happened a lot. Another pretty gruesome thing they did is they played their own version of soccer mixed with basketball, except it wasn't that much like soccer or basketball because the team that lost had their heads cut off and used as the ball in the next round. Speaking of heads, they liked theirs flat and long, so they often used wooden boards strapped to the heads of young men and women to elongate their heads, and they also filed their teeth into points. I'm sure there's more, but let's leave it there for now.
Gladiators were held in pretty high regard in ancient Rome. Sure, many of them were slaves and criminals, but not all. They were all seen as strong, virile warriors though, and that meant there had to be some special power running through their veins. So when a gladiator died, it wasn't uncommon for parts of their bodies to be used to cure different ailments. Epilepsy was a big one. It was believed that consuming the red stuff from a fallen gladiator would give the epileptic person some of the strength the gladiator had in life. Gladiators' livers were also believed to be a powerful medicine, and even when it came to cosmetics, parts of gladiators were used. Their dead skin would be scraped up from bathtubs and used in face creams, which for some reason grosses me out the most. Imagine finding out that UFC fighters' dead skin was used in your bottle of facial moisturizer.
Next up, while not as gruesome as the rest, I have a feeling talking about bed bugs is gonna make it pretty hard to sleep tonight. I get it if you're mad at me, but just remember, I'm doing it to myself too. Bed bugs were rampant in ancient times, and there really wasn't any way to get rid of them, meaning that ancient civilizations just had to deal with the infestations, the bites, and the itching, which of course often led to infection. The oldest bedbug specimen found in Egypt was 3,500 years old, and it was discovered in 1999. But recently, at the Mile Point Cave site in Oregon, researchers discovered an even older member of the bedbug genus that lived over 11,000 years ago and would have likely fed on hunter-gatherer civilizations who seasonally frequented the caves. Yeah, count me out of this whole thing.
How did a samurai test the quality of his katana back in the day? Traditionally, they would duel other samurai in what was known as sujigiri. Sometimes they'd practice with their new blade on criminals and corpses as well. But there was one other way to test the quality of a new katana or fighting style. Just attack a random passerby in the street. In the Sengoku period, the word sujigiri took on a whole new meaning, referring to samurai often testing their blades on innocent people out in the street. They would need to know their blade could cut through a person effectively before taking it into battle. So if there weren't any other options, what better way to test a sword than by doing just that? Usually the victims would be commoners wandering the roads alone at night. Sujigiri started becoming a real problem in the Sengoku period. The samurai just had too much power and seemed to kill indiscriminately. By 1602 though, the practice was outlawed, with offenders being sentenced to death. But that didn't mean it just stopped immediately. In the early years of the Edo period, innocent people were still being sliced up in the street.
Here's something gross about the ancient Egyptians. Not only did ancient Egyptian men love the company of beautiful women, some of them really didn't care whether or not the woman was alive or dead. And so, as was typical in ancient Egypt, when a man died, he was embalmed right away, but when a beautiful woman died, she was actually left to decay for 3 or 4 days in order to make her less desirable to embalmers tasked with working on the preservation of her body. While this might seem a bit extra, it was actually super necessary, because it's not just something ancient Egyptians woke up one day and decided on. It was their solution to a very real problem that became apparent to the rulers of the civilizations after one too many embalmers had gotten caught in the act.
Speaking of ancient Egyptians, there was another practice that was pretty disturbing by today's standards. It wasn't uncommon for servants to be buried alongside their deceased masters, especially those of high rank, like pharaohs. This practice was seen as an honor, not a punishment. Egyptians believed strongly in an afterlife where they would continue their existence, and it was important to make sure there was a smooth transition. Being buried with their master meant the servant could continue serving them in the afterlife. Yeah, imagine you had to go into work one day and you found out your boss had just died. Then you're told you have to join them in their burial just because you work for them. Might sound strange to us today, at least I hope it does. Where are you working if that doesn't sound strange? But back then, it was seen as a sign of respect and devotion.
And finally, let's talk hygiene. While when you think of ancient civilizations, your mind generally does not jump to self-care and cleanliness, rituals of cleaning and freshening up did exist back then, although they may as well not have. For this last point, I'm going to be specifically talking about ancient Roman hygiene, which for starters consisted of toothpaste fashioned out of powdered rat brains and using one's own urine as mouthwash. I love history movies, especially ones like Alexander the Great, but it's times like this that I'm super glad they haven't created some kind of 4D viewing experience that allows you to follow the movies with all 5 senses, especially smell. Oh, and remember a few years ago when toilet paper went flying off the shelves and people who didn't get to it in time started seriously freaking out? Well, the Romans wouldn't have minded because their toilet paper was actually just a sponge tied to a stick that they shared. Oh, and due to methane buildup caused by a lack of irrigation in ancient times, their toilets often exploded. Oh, and their band-aids were made of cobwebs, but that's all the time we have for you today.
At one time, the Vinća civilization was one of the largest prehistoric cultures in Europe. They were around for about 1500 years. From about 5500 BCE to 4000 BC. They were in parts of what is now Serbia and Romania. The civilization is named after the village of Vinća and the Danube River, where some of the biggest archaeological discoveries were made in the 20th century. The Vinća people had advanced metalworking skills, especially when it came to copper. They excavated the earliest known mine in Europe, and they actually may have been the first civilization in the world to work with copper. These people didn't have a fully developed writing system, but archaeologists have found examples of proto-writing, symbols and marks that don't form a language necessarily, but may have been used as a kind of early form of communication. Their society was also quite organized. Their homes were carefully planned with designated areas for waste disposal. They've also found children's toys during excavations like animal figures and rattles. The Zapotec civilization, ever heard of them? They're usually overshadowed by the more famous Aztecs and Maya, but they were one of the earliest cultures in Mesoamerica. They were pioneers when it came to agriculture and developed one of the first writing systems in the region. Their biggest city was Monte Alban, built around the 5th century BCE. It was around for around 1200 years and at its peak housed around 25,000 people. The ruling class was made up of priests, warriors, and artists overseeing the lower classes, and they subjugated nearby areas, assimilating them into their civilization. What caused their decline? It's not entirely clear. Monte Alban was mostly left intact when the civilization began to fade, so it doesn't seem like there was a catastrophic event that caused the downfall. Could have been economic trouble, which caused people to up and look for work in other places. Eventually, the remaining groups split up into other city-states, which started to compete against each other, which led to the end of their culture altogether. The Hittites. These were an ancient Anatolian civilization that came about around the 2nd millennium BCE in what is now modern-day Turkey. They formed a powerful empire, reaching their peak in the mid-14th century BCE under a king named Suppiluliuma I. At the time, they controlled a large territory that included much of Anatolia and parts of northern Syria. For centuries, the Hittites were only known about through references in other cultures, mainly because their civilization had collapsed by the end of the 12th century BCE. The remnants of their empire was lost to time, and it wasn't until the 19th century that physical evidence of them was rediscovered. In 1834, a French scholar by the name of Charles Texier found what would later be known as the Hittite ruins. At the time, he didn't recognize how significant they were. In the late 1800s, though, archaeological findings at sites like Göbekli Tepe revealed trade records mentioning the land of Hatti. Then in 1906, archaeologist Hugo Winkler uncovered over 10,000 clay tablets inscribed in cuneiform, one of the oldest known forms of writing. And these tablets revealed tons of stuff about the Hittite Empire and how it was governed, their culture, and their language. The Nabataeans were an Arab civilization that lived in northern Arabia and the southern Levant. Their most famous city, Petra, is in modern-day Jordan and was a major trading hub that connected a number of trade routes across the region. The Nabataeans lived between the 4th and 2nd centuries BCE and built a kingdom centered around trade, becoming pretty wealthy and influential. They were very independent, able to fend off several attempts by empires including the Romans to control them, but in 106 CE, Emperor Trajan annexed their kingdom into the Roman Empire. The Nabataeans still managed to preserve a large part of their culture though, which included finely crafted ceramics and very distinctive architecture, like the rock-cut buildings found in Petra. Their history dates back to at least 312 BCE, when they were first mentioned in battle reports. As they expanded, they gained control over key territories including Damascus. Petra became quite the city, home to around 20,000 people at its height. Over time, the Nabataeans adopted Greek as the dominant language, and by the 5th century, many of them had converted to Christianity. The civilization's decline began with the rise of new Arab groups, and eventually, the Nabataean culture dissipated. The Clovis people. These were an ancient group that lived in North America around 13,000 years ago. They are known for their stone tools, especially their fluted projectile points called Clovis points. The Clovers were some of the earliest known human inhabitants in North America. In 1929, a 19-year-old named Ridgely Whiteman discovered a Clovis site near Blackwater Draw in New Mexico. The site contains stone tools along with the remains of mammoths, which was evidence that there was human activity during the Pleistocene era. Before this, another big discovery happened in 1927 at the Folsom site, where the remains of a now extinct bison species were found alongside human-made tools. This was the first definitive evidence of humans in the Americas during that period. Excavations at Blackwater Draw revealed thousands of artifacts over several years, confirming the existence of a culture that relied heavily on hunting large game like mammoths. The Clovis people were highly mobile hunter-gatherers, but their culture didn't last forever. As the megafauna began to dwindle, so did the way of life for the Clovis people. That, along with the extinction of mammoths, which they may have relied heavily on for food. Çatalhöyük is a Neolithic settlement in Turkey that dates back around 7500 BC. It was rediscovered in the late 50s by James Mallard, who found these layers of buildings. Excavations showed that the settlement consisted of tightly packed mud brick houses, and there were no streets. So how did the people get around? Well, they moved around on the rooftops. Suffice to say, the architecture is fascinating and incredibly unique. Houses were accessed through holes in the ceiling, and there were no clear public buildings. They also found a ton of artifacts, from everyday tools to murals depicting hunting scenes and even human figures. People also buried their dead underneath their homes, and I briefly mentioned this before, but another really cool thing about this society was that there were no grand buildings or signs of a ruling class at all. It seems like social status was relatively equal among everyone. The people at Çatalhöyük were also into agriculture, growing grains like wheat and barley, while also hunting and gathering. The Olmecs were one of the earliest and most influential civilizations in Mesoamerica. They started to form around 1400 to 1200 BCE, but more recent discoveries may push them back even further, to about 16 to 15 BCE, thanks to findings at a site called El Manati. The Olmecs are believed to have evolved from early farming cultures in the Tabasco region dating back as far as 5100 BCE. Their first major center was San Lorenzo. Tenochtitlan, the region's fertile land, and the Coatzacoalcos River helped support a pretty sizable population, leading to the rise of an elite class that demanded fancier goods. And the elites traded for materials like jade and obsidian found in far-off places, which means they had a trade network across Mesoamerica. As time went on, San Lorenzo eventually fell apart around 900 BCE. La Venta then took the spotlight. From 900 BCE until about 400 BCE, La Venta was home to the Great Pyramid, the Mesoamerican version, of course, the largest structure in Mesoamerica at the time, which still stands today. The Olmec civilization is most famous for their massive stone heads, believed to be portraits of their rulers. Each head is unique and is adorned with distinctive headdresses. The Khmer Empire was a powerful civilization in Southeast Asia that lasted from 802 CE to 1431, thereabouts. It stretched across present-day Thailand, Cambodia, Laos, and parts of Vietnam. This empire was this blend of Buddhist and Hindu cultures, which came about after centuries of conflict. The Khmer are also best known for their incredible architecture, particularly the temples of Angkor, which are still some of the most impressive monuments in the world. And a lot of these structures are, thankfully, still in remarkably good condition to this day. But like a lot of great civilizations, the Khmer Empire eventually began to decline. As for why? Well, one possibility is that the migration of Thai people slowly encroached on Khmer territory, similar to how Germanic tribes moved into the Roman Empire. This gradual takeover may have weakened the Khmer's political influence over time. Others think that constant warfare is what did them in. Another theory is that there could have been changes in the climate that messed with their agriculture. If rainfall patterns changed, the Khmer might have struggled to maintain their farms, and mass amounts of people would have had to leave. The Nabta Playa people lived in southern Egypt around 6,000 to 11,000 years ago. They were primarily nomadic, moving around in search of food and water. Eventually, some members began to settle in the area, forming a more permanent civilization. As the climate started drying out, the region transformed into a desert, which would have sucked for them, but it did help preserve a lot of the artifacts that they left behind. One of the most famous things they left behind is the stone circle of Nabta Playa, which is the oldest known astronomical site on Earth. But along with marking the seasons, archaeologists have discovered animal remains in underground chambers, meaning that rituals may have taken place here as well. Like the other ancient civilizations on this list, the Nabta Playa people eventually disappeared. Climate change played a major role in their decline, pushing them to migrate and adapt elsewhere. And finally, the Minoan civilization lived on the Greek island of Crete from around 3000 to 1000 BC. They were a distinct culture recognized as the early ancestors of later ancient Greek society. The Minoans had pretty interesting religious lives, which included animal sacrifices, big festivals, and a number of cults celebrating nature and fertility. Egyptian hieroglyphs reference the Minoans, and from this we can determine they were active traders. They were also skilled in arts, coming up with beautiful pottery and intricate frescoes, but their civilization fell away, and one theory is that it was thanks to a volcanic eruption in the nearby Santorini Islands, which could have unleashed all these devastating tsunamis and ash clouds. Another theory comes from the Greek historian Herodotus, who thought that plagues and diseases might have been the cause. But like most of the ancient civilizations on this list, we don't know exactly how they disappeared. One of the most fascinating things in archaeology has to be the disappearance of mass amounts of people, leaving behind their artwork, artifacts, and architecture, and questions about who they were and why they left their homes and cities behind. Seeing as we don't have the technology to fly around the world in 10 minutes yet, we're going to share these incredible places with you through the power of the World Wide Web. And we're starting off the list with a pretty amazing civilization, the Indus. They existed from around 3300 BCE to 1300 BCE in what is now Pakistan and northwest India. It's often called one of the world's oldest civilizations, but they were pretty advanced. They had sanitation systems that wouldn't be matched until the Roman times, which is pretty crazy. They had busy cities with well-planned streets, houses, and even indoor bathrooms, apparently. Two major cities, Harappa and Mohenjo-daro, are probably the most well-known. These cities had intricate brickwork, drainage systems, and there's evidence of a written script that we haven't even been able to fully decipher to this day. These folks were not just good at city building, they were also savvy traders. The Indus people traded with Mesopotamia, using boats to transport goods. Agriculture was a big deal too, with well-irrigated fields for growing crops. But around 1300 BCE, the civilization started to fall off. We're not entirely sure why. Some think it could be due to climate change affecting their water sources, so people up and left migrating southeast. Today, all that's left of the ancient city of Angkor in Cambodia is Angkor Wat, this beautiful temple complex, which also happens to be the largest religious structure in the entire world. Yeah, it's pretty remarkable, and as large as it is, it's still only just one part of a city that used to be larger than modern-day New York City. Angkor, the capital of the Khmer Empire. This place had magnificent temples, including Angkor Wat, so you can only imagine how many more amazing structures there were, considering how vast this place was. But around the 15th century, the city declined and was eventually abandoned. There may have been environmental stress here. The complex irrigation system may have strained resources, causing soil depletion and impacting food production. There could have also been prolonged droughts that affected their ability to support a large population. Researchers aren't exactly sure how many people lived there, of course, but considering the size, there were probably a lot. And there were were also power struggles and invasions, which weakened the Khmer Empire, eventually leading to the decline of their largest city, followed by the empire itself about 300 years later. This next civilization was also pretty incredible, but things didn't end quite as smoothly for them as the first point on this list. Rather than people just moving and settling somewhere else because of issues with agriculture, it looks like things ended pretty violently for the Anasazi. The Anasazi were an ancient Native American people who lived in the Four Corners region of the United States, where Colorado, Utah, Arizona, and New Mexico meet. They were skilled builders, creating these impressive homes that were carved into the sides of cliffs. These dwellings were kind of like the skyscrapers of their time. They towered over everything else in the region until the 1880s, when actual skyscrapers came into play. But for as advanced as they were, things did not end well. The theory is that they were dealing with a long-term drought, and deforestation was happening too. They were using up a lot of wood, probably for building and cooking. Add water management issues to the mix, and it's easy to see why things started to fall apart. Tensions rose due to desperation, and that's what likely led to violent conflicts. And by around 1300 AD, the Anasazi had mostly dispersed. Next on the list, we have the Rapa Nui civilization on Easter Island. This is the island with all those amazing stone statues known as moai. The fact that they were able to carve these things out of volcanoes and then transport the 14-ton behemoths around the island is a pretty incredible feat. For a long time, it was a complete mystery as to how they actually did it, but it turns out they would have used a system of ropes with a team pulling the statues back and forth, making the moai kind of like walk. It's pretty cool. So what went wrong with the Rapa Nui? Well, scientists dug into the dirt, looking at ancient charcoal pieces and pollen in the soil, found that the Rapa Nui had chopped down almost every tree on the island. Then rats on the island were eating the tree seeds before new trees could grow, so the forest was completely wiped out. Without trees, the people lost their ability to make rope and canoes, and apparently they started burning grass to make fire. This was all pretty bad, and you can bet tensions were high, and things would have gotten even worse when Europeans showed up in 1722. The first Europeans to set foot on Easter Island, they did their thing. They didn't come in peace. It's about as classic as it gets, unfortunately. And if that wasn't enough, by the 1870s, waves of smallpox and a major Peruvian slave raid hit the Rapa Nui, and these were the last nails in the coffin for the already small population on the island. Next up are the Mississippians. The Mississippians were a group of Native American societies that thrived in the southeastern United States from around 800 to 1600 AD. They were known for building these complex societies with impressive mounds, and Cahokia was one of their biggest and most impressive cities. This place, located near present-day St. Louis, Missouri, was the largest pre-Columbian settlement north of Mexico. At its peak, it had a population of around 20,000 people, possibly even double that. It had enormous earthen mounds, including the famous Monk's Mound, which is still one of the largest man-made earthen mounds in North America, but it eventually fell. Around the late 13th century, the population began to dwindle, and by the 14th century, the city was largely abandoned. Nature slowly reclaimed the area. It's not very clear what led to the decline. There aren't explicit records from that time, but it was probably a combination of things, environmental and economic. Next on the list are the people of the Nabta Playa. So Nabta Playa is a dry lake bed located in the Nubian desert of southern Egypt. It has these archaeological remains dating back to around 10,000 to 6,000 years ago during the Neolithic period. The people who once lived here left behind evidence of their advanced understanding of astronomy and agriculture. They erected a stone circle kind of similar to the Stonehenge in England, which seems to be what they used to map the stars. Some archaeologists think these stone formations worked as an ancient kind of calendar, but other than the stone circles they left behind, we really don't know a whole lot about the people of Nabta Playa. Archaeologists and historians are still trying to piece together their daily lives, social structures, and what ultimately happened to them. The site seems to have been abandoned around 5,000 years ago, but the lack of written records from that time period, it makes it tough to pinpoint the exact reasons behind their disappearance. Next up we have Çatalhöyük. Çatalhöyük in central Turkey is not only one of the first known urban settlements in the world, but also one of the strangest. So instead of streets like you have with most cities, I mean every city, here all the homes and buildings were connected, and to get around people walked along the paths on roofs and then descended down into their homes with ladders. Looking at images of the place, it looks almost like a big ginormous honeycomb type of formation. It's very unique. There aren't really any places like it. There were also no cemeteries. Residents buried their dead underneath their own homes. The fate of its inhabitants is still mysterious, which isn't surprising considering how ancient it is, but around 6700 BCE, the site was abandoned, and researchers are still piecing together the reasons behind it. The ancient city of Thonis, which now sits at the bottom of the Mediterranean Sea. I love ancient underwater cities. There's just something so beautiful but eerie about them at the same time. So Thonis was an Egyptian city located near the mouth of the Nile River. It was one of the most important port cities in ancient Egypt, a thriving port city during the time of the pharaohs, a center for trade with Greece and other Mediterranean countries, and it played a big role in the Egyptian economy. The city had these grand temples and statues dedicated to the various gods and goddesses of ancient Egypt, but then it sank. There were probably natural disasters like earthquakes, and of course the sea levels rose, and for centuries this place was lost and forgotten until underwater archaeologists discovered its ruins in 2000, with divers finding well-preserved artifacts like statues, pottery, and religious objects. Alright, we gotta talk about it. The lost city of Atlantis. Atlantis was a legendary city first mentioned by the ancient Greek philosopher Plato, and according to Plato, Atlantis was this powerful and advanced civilization that existed around 9,000 years before his own time, so that's about 11,000 years ago from today. But it's still a complete mystery as to whether or not this place really did exist. A lot of uppity scientists say it didn't, but they also sound very not fun. It's said that Atlantis had a sophisticated government, advanced technology, and a prosperous economy. The Atlanteans were described as this powerful, warlike people who eventually became corrupt and decadent, leading the gods to punish them by submerging their island beneath the sea in a single day and night. The exact location of Atlantis is still unknown, and there are a lot of archaeologists that figure Atlantis, the whole story behind it, was really just a legend and an allegory rather than an actual place. Some of the rumored locations, though, range from the Mediterranean to Antarctica, but there's never been any definitive physical evidence of its existence. And finally, of course, we have the Maya, who created some of the most incredible architecture and artwork of any known ancient civilization. And not only were their cities and artwork spectacular, but their knowledge about astronomy was unparalleled for the time. But around the 9th and 10th centuries, their cities, which once bustled with life, started to empty out, and that's always been a mystery as to why. It's hard to pinpoint an exact cause because parts of the civilization fell at various times. It was a wide-stretching civilization with various languages and practices across the board, but there are some ideas as to what happened. Environmental stress is usually a big factor. Could have been droughts or crop failures. Another thing could be overpopulation. Resources could have started running thin, and when there's overpopulation, there's more violence. Not a great recipe for a peaceful society. There might have been some political problems as well, with rulers losing control, causing internal conflicts.
They sat at the feet of the ancient Egyptians. They said they learned everything they knew from the ancient Egyptians, but somehow archaeology has rewritten the narrative.
From mastercraft ships preserved for thousands of years to shocking new mummy discoveries, these ancient Egypt secrets will blow your mind. Up first is the Rosetta Stone. The Rosetta Stone was one of the single most important archaeological discoveries ever made in human history, and the single most important discovery when it comes to the ancient Egyptian world. The Rosetta Stone is an obelisk inscribed with a royal decree from King Ptolemy V. The decree was for all citizens of Egypt, and given Egypt was an expansive expansive empire with numerous different dialects and languages, it was written in 3 different scripts. The top has Egyptian hieroglyphics, while the middle has the slightly later Demotic script, which is also an Egyptian language but with letters instead of glyphs. Finally, the base is written in Old Greek. Each script was written in almost the exact same way, meaning the text was the first discovered that allowed modern knowledge of ancient Greek to lead to actual translations of both Demotic and hieroglyphic. Without this discovery, we would have no idea how to read thousands of other documents and texts, and it's allowed scientists and researchers to actually translate the discovered writings on sarcophagi, tombs, papyrus, and much more. It's difficult to imagine just how different our knowledge of ancient Egypt and Greece would be without our knowledge of the Rosetta Stone. Next is the Khufu ship. The Khufu ship was discovered in the grave of Pharaoh Khufu and is the oldest known ship ever discovered. Not only is it incredibly old and filled with unfathomably valuable grave goods, the Khufu ship is also in incredibly good condition. It's a style called a solar barge, allegedly the very ship design which the sun god Ra sails, and it's in such insanely good condition that this 5,000-year-old ship could be dropped in a river or lake today and would sail as well as it did 5,000 years ago. It's so well preserved, even the rope survived the sands of time, and numerous traditional ancient Egyptian rope tying techniques were gleaned from the boat. It's considered a masterwork of woodcraft and shipbuilding, and elevates our opinion of the engineering ability of the ancient Egyptians greatly. It was made of Lebanese cedar, the same as the tree on the current Lebanese flag. Next is the Unknown Queen. In 2022, archaeologists working near Saqqara quite literally rewrote history when they discovered a brand new tomb while excavating King Tut's tomb. Saqqara is a massive necropolis, a city of the deceased, where hundreds of thousands of remains and burials were conducted. They uncovered 300 more coffins and over 100 more mummies, but even greater, they discovered a brand new Egyptian queen, literally never before heard of in the historical record, Queen Neith. Neith was undoubtedly powerful and respected, judging by her ornate casket and the tomb she was placed in, but to discover an Egyptian queen entirely unrecorded in the historical record is a truly fantastic and mind-blowing discovery, and opens up numerous doors for more Egyptologists and researchers to investigate. The tomb was also likely built in the New Kingdom period, which is over 3,000 years ago and is considered highly unique for an area better known for Old Kingdom period tombs. The tomb also includes a mummy with a solid gold face mask, gaming pieces for the game's Senate, a huge limestone sarcophagus, and a soldier buried with his bronze axe. Next is the Gizeh Chamber. In March of 2023, a truly incredible discovery was made that flipped the archaeological community on its head. The Great Pyramid of Giza, which has been standing for thousands of years and studied for hundreds, still somehow has new discoveries to reveal to us. Using advanced ultrasound techniques and infrared thermography, a new team of researchers were able to locate and identify a mysterious hidden chamber. Now, no one's been inside, only identified it through scientific means, and we really don't know what the chamber is meant to be for. Some have said it's some sort of ritual room, perhaps a place for sacrifices or curses, or maybe it's a storage closet for the workers who built the pyramid that was bricked up when they were done. Researchers are fairly certain that the room takes significant weight off of the entryway and may be a sort of internal structural arch, designed to reduce weight and spread out the strain so the entrance doesn't collapse. It's believed these techniques were perfected on previous pyramids, but we still have no idea what this enclosed and hidden chamber could possibly be for. Knowing the ancient Egyptians, it's almost impossible that it holds no spiritual, religious, or cultural meaning whatsoever, and yet there does not seem to be any way inside. Maybe it's a waiting room for the spirits of the dead. Next is the Golden Tongue. At the Taposiris Magna Temple, researchers made a fascinating discovery, finding several poorly preserved mummies with a shocking item, a golden tongue placed inside the skull. The ancient Egyptians believed a golden tongue was required to be able to speak to Osiris in the afterlife, but it was long considered a myth by many that they would actually place gold tongues into the mummies' mouths. This is no gold leaf either, but a solid gold tongue left inside of the mummies. There were numerous other artifacts and quite a bit of gold as well, but the mummies were in a shockingly poor state. They were very badly preserved and almost entirely broken down, something which is very unusual given that the Egyptians had mastered the art of mummification Given that the Egyptians had mastered the art of mummification several decades before this tomb was filled with the deceased, it may be possible that the family didn't have the money to pay for the full embalming, but could spare enough for the gold for the tongue. However, it does still leave a mystery. These people were obviously well loved and well off given the amount of things they had to accompany them, so maybe they just had a bad embalmer. Next are mysterious mummies. Egypt is revered in the scientific community for two big things: cool new dinosaur species, and a whole crapload of mummies. The Saqqara necropolis is one of the largest necropolises on Earth and has been the home of several tens of thousands of mummies, both human and otherwise. Recently, however, Saqqara was the site of another mummy discovery, this time of several mummified cats, snakes, and crocodiles. That's not all though. There were also mummified birds and even a mummified beetle, about 4 times larger than it should have been. Maybe someone saw a massive beetle and thought, wow, this is incredible, we should really preserve this for the future generations, and hopefully everybody around them said, you're weird, dude. There were also 75 bronze cat statues, really not dodging the weird accusations. Cats were deeply important to the ancient Egyptians, not only because they dealt with pests and prevented disease, but also because they were seen as almost godlike, and as a proud personal servant of a cat, I can totally see where they're coming from. Several dozen mummified house cats were discovered alongside 5 mummified big cats, at least one of which is a lion. It's likely these were offerings or idols of some sort, allowing the living to closer connect to the realm of the gods and the dead. And finally is the Falcon Shrine. The port of Berenike was a critical one for the ancient Egyptians, and so continues to be searched and excavated in search of strange and wondrous things. And boy oh boy is this strange, at least. Archaeologists discovered a shrine filled with some of the most unusual items ever discovered. First and most shocking were the 15 headless falcons. Why were the falcons headless? Why were there so many? We don't know, but that's not all. The falcons were arrayed on a dais before a stone pedestal holding 3 stone statues of gods. One was the child god Harpocrates, another has a falcon head but has not been quite identified, and the last has also not been identified but has cow horns and a solar disc. It's believed the falcons were offerings to the gods alongside some other remains that suggest sacrifice and feasting took place in this small temple. There was an iron harpoon also laid out alongside the falcons, but the final piece may be the most unusual. A large stela that reads, in ancient Greek, "It is improper to boil a head here." So at least we know the falcon heads weren't boiled, but we know very, very little else about this religious group. The temple dates from after the 4th century AD, meaning Christianity was already the dominant religion in the Roman Empire, and yet this small cult or temple continued to survive, showing that the ancient Egyptians did not just trade over to Christianity, but that the old gods survived for longer in worship than we initially believed.
But just because we find remnants of an ancient civilization doesn't really mean we know anything about them.
It's true. Some of them we are just boggled at. Scientists, archaeologists, historians alike. They've struggled to explain a few, and these are some of those few.
Let's find out where they're boggled, baffled, and confused.
Starting off our list today with the peoples of Nan Madol, who lived approximately 1,200 years ago in the ancient city Nan Madol off Pohnpei, Micronesia, located in the western Pacific, about 2,500 miles southwest of Hawaii. The civilization lived on the east side of the island, but the materials used to build their civilization were only ever available on the west side. And so the people of Nan Madol must have journeyed from one side of the island to the other in order to retrieve the 750,000 tons of heavy basalt they used to construct their intricate structures. By the way, the average modern day cruise ship only weighs about 250,000 tons, so these materials would have been about triple that. And not only did they have to move these materials, they had to carve and shape and stack them too. I mean, clearly they did a great job, seeing as many of their structures still stand today, but it was also done without any concrete or mortar whatsoever. It's literally just the weight of the stones that have held ritual sites, temples, and tombs together to this day. It is an amazing achievement, but historians truly have no idea how the civilization could have possibly done what they did without the assistance of modern day technology. It's a true historic mystery.
When it comes to mysterious ancient Mesoamerican civilizations, the Mayans are usually the first to come to mind, but probably even more mysterious are the Olmecs. You look up Olmecs on Google Images and you'll see tons of pictures of their beautifully crafted sculptures, but not a whole lot is really known about their culture or why they disappeared. They were one of the earliest civilizations in the Americas, living in what is now southern Mexico, around 1200 to 400 BCE. From what has been left behind, they were a pretty advanced civilization, but even still, so much about them has been lost to time. They're probably most well known for their colossal stone heads, massive sculptures, some weighing as much as 40 tons, often depicting human faces. The fact that the Olmecs transported and carved them without the type of technology we have today is pretty impressive. They may have also developed one of the earliest known writing systems in the Americas, but only a few inscriptions have ever been found, and they're hard to decipher. They seem to influence later cultures though. Their art style, some of their religious symbols, they appear in other Mesoamerican societies that came along after the Olmecs had vanished. So maybe they just dispersed and formed into other societies.
Next up, we have the peoples of Göbekli Tepe, an 11,000-year-old ancient civilization in southeastern Turkey found in 1994 that is believed to have built the world's very first temple, and archaeologists and historians have absolutely no idea how they could have done it. Only 5% of the site has been excavated to date, but so far the ruins of 20 circles of rock pillars, which with each pillar weighing up to 50 tons and most measuring in at almost 16 feet high, engraved with animal carvings and human forms, were located at the site of Göbekli Tepe, with no clues as to how the massive formations could have possibly been erected in the prehistoric world. The structures created at Göbekli Tepe are comparable with the achievements of the Great Pyramids, which came roughly 7,000 years after the first temple was built. While scientists studying the site have absolutely no idea how it came to be, they have theorized that it was used for either ancient rituals or as an ancient observatory. Basically, they have no idea what's going on here. They're stumped and they're confused. What was it? Baffled, bobbled, discum, bobbled. They don't understand.
I love the idea of lost ancient civilizations, ones that may or may not have actually existed. Makes you wonder if there's this lost period of time similar to what Robert E. Howard depicted in his Conan stories. One supposedly lost civilization you don't hear about often though is the lost continent of Mu. So according to the story, Mu was a large landmass somewhere in the Pacific Ocean, home to an advanced civilization. The continent is said to have sank beneath the waves thousands of years ago. So a lot like Atlantis. Mu is often said to be pretty much the same as Lemuria as well. The idea of Mu became popular in the late 19th and early 20th centuries thanks to writers like James Churchward. Churchward claimed to have discovered these ancient tablets in India that told the story of Mu. He described it as a highly developed society with sophisticated knowledge of science and technology, but there's said to be no verifiable evidence of Mu or Lemuria. The idea that an entire continent would just sink like that in such a short amount of time is just not really how it works. The land may break apart and drift over time, but it wouldn't just vanish without a trace. Still though, there could be a grain of truth behind the legend and others like it. Stories of Mu might be based on real events that have just been misinterpreted over time or embellished. Could be referring to smaller islands that were submerged, for example.
Next up, we have the Kofun tombs, 16,000 ancient tombs, the largest of which is over 1,000 feet wide and 1,600 feet long, which is twice as long as the largest tomb in the Great Pyramid of Giza. The Kofun tombs are located in Japan. They are tightly sealed, and for some reason, they also look like a giant keyhole. Historians assume that the Kofun tombs were built for the 16th emperor of Japan, Emperor Nintoku, who supposedly died in 399 AD at the age of 109. But since they have yet to excavate the sacred site, there is really no way to know for sure. Right now, it's really just one big mystery, and it's looking like it might stay that way, unfortunately, or fortunately, because the grounds are classified as a sacred religious area. Trying to enter them is illegal, and trying to dig them up would surely land you at least 1 or 2 years behind bars. I think we should maybe just let this one rest and remain a mystery. Sometimes it's nice to wonder.
Next, we head to China with the Sanxingdui, an ancient culture and archaeological site found in 1986. It's one of the most mysterious archaeological finds in China. Now, there were clues about an ancient society in the area discovered all the way back in 1927, but a much larger scale excavation was carried out in 1986 after workers digging a ditch stumbled on these two large pits filled with thousands of artifacts, which turned out to be over 3,000 years old. The Shangxingdui culture produced incredible art and craftsmanship unlike anything seen from other ancient Chinese cultures. Included in the artifacts were bronze masks, gold and jade items, and intricate statues. One of the biggest mysteries of Shangxingdui is why the civilization suddenly vanished. The artifacts seem to hint that they were a highly developed society, but there aren't any written records or any clear explanations for why they would have disappeared. It also seems like they were different from other ancient Chinese cultures. Their art and their artifacts are so unique that they don't seem to fit with the known history and development of ancient China. So when it comes to who these people were and what their culture was like, we really can't say for sure.
Next up, we have the Boskop man, a potential prehistoric, now extinct, human-like species that could have lived as recently as 10,000 years ago and might have had craniums much larger than our own. It is estimated that their brains could have been up to 30% larger than our own, and if that was the case, their IQ would have been around 149. The average IQ in America is 98. However, the increased intelligence would of course depend on where the Boskop man carried the majority of their brain mass, as intelligence increase generally happens in the prefrontal cortex of the brain, which is largely responsible for our highest cognitive functions like decision-making, memory, and self-awareness. With that being said, perhaps their frontal cortices were so big that they became so self-aware they ended up enlightened and eventually decided to become one with the universe. This, of course, is all scientific speculation, seeing as the only evidence of the peoples are partial skull fragments, but many scientists seem to believe the theory, so personally, I'm on board with the highly intelligent prehistoric men that probably would have beat me in a game of chess, but I think anyone would. I suck at chess.
Next on the list, we have the city of Cahokia, which is located in what is now Collinsville, Illinois. At one time, it was a thriving city built by the Mississippian culture. Today, visitors can't explore the city, or what's left of it anyway. There's not much. It is pretty cool though. It just looks like a series of oddly shaped hills, but these hills weren't naturally formed. They're man-made dirt mounds that were once home to thousands of people. Cahokia started as a collection of small villages around 1050 AD, but by 1250, it was one of the largest settlements in the Americas. But then, it was mysteriously abandoned or destroyed. We still don't know exactly what happened. There are no written records from that time, and there wasn't a whole lot of archaeological evidence left behind.
Next up, we have my favorite. I don't care if you don't care about it. It's Atlantis, the peoples of Atlantis. And before you run to the comments to tell me you don't believe it or you've heard it before, sit back, relax, and listen to some evidence you might have not heard before. Did you know that there are actually records of Atlantis written by the ancient Greek philosopher Plato, who described the city being located just outside the Strait of Gibraltar? For centuries, people thought that Plato was off his rocker. Many people still do. But what many people don't know is that while everyone is out searching for the lost city in the deep ocean, it might have already been found. In space. Well, it was discovered from space, and it's located in Mauritania, Africa. In 1965, the Richat structure, a deeply eroded dominal structure, was discovered by two astronauts while flying over Africa. While the area is barren and dry today, evidence suggests that at one time, the entire structure was submerged completely underwater. Sound familiar? Could this truly be the lost city of Atlantis, or is it still just out there waiting to be found? Or if you think it doesn't exist, you're wrong.
And finally, we have what are known as the Big Circles, mysterious structures found in a number of locations across the Middle East. The massive circular shapes are only visible from above, and they're made of stone walls or small stone mounds. They've been spotted in different locations in the region, mainly in Jordan and Syria. But what were they built for? Nobody really knows. One of the strangest aspects of the big circles is their age, which is hard to even figure out without any artifacts connected with them or any written records. Archaeologists have found it tough to date these structures accurately, leading to a lot of debates about their origins and even the cultures that might have created them. Lots of theories have come about in the attempt to unravel the purpose of the circles. Some researchers have said that the circles served as burial sites. Others speculate that they may have been used to house animals, but the walls aren't really high enough for that, most of them only having been built a few feet high. Of course, we have a bit of a similarity here to crop circles, and hey, we all know the conspiracies surrounding them, so I find this one kind of cool. The Sumerians weren't just one of the first civilizations, they were also one of the strangest. These guys popped up out of nowhere seemingly around 3100 BCE in what's now Iraq, bringing with them advanced knowledge of writing, astronomy, and law. And there's also something else they're known for though. Their myths, more specifically the Anunnaki, beings who came down from the heavens and were said to have given them their knowledge. Now, ancient people talking about receiving knowledge from a higher power isn't all that unique. You're going to hear it more on this list as well, but some think that the Sumerians were actually describing an alien race. See, some of their artwork seems to show figures that look eerily like modern depictions of aliens, tall, slender, and humanoid, but not really, and of course, coming from the sky. They also wrote about these beings, describing how the Anunnaki created humans to do hard labor, like digging canals and working the land. Well, some theorists take their story and say, well, what if creating humans actually meant genetic engineering? Were the Sumerians just writing myth, or were they actually recording something much more literal? Some researchers believe the Sumerians' rapid advancement doesn't make sense without some kind of outside influence either. How did they develop advanced irrigation and the world's first cities almost overnight? And let's not forget their knowledge of the solar system. Some of their texts describe the night sky in ways that were pretty ahead of their time. So is it possible they were getting their astronomy lessons from advanced beings from another planet? You probably don't need me to tell you that the Maya were ahead of their time. They had insanely accurate calendars, complex cities, and a deep understanding of the cosmos, so it probably comes as no surprise that they're often associated with theories about ancient aliens. Here's where a lot of that comes from. Some of their carvings and artifacts look like they're depicting figures in spacesuits. One of the most famous examples is the lid of Pakal's tomb. Some say it shows him piloting what looks like a spacecraft, with buttons and knobs and controls and what looks like a breathing apparatus and flames shooting out at the bottom. Traditional archaeologists say it's just a stylized representation of the afterlife or something, but let's be real, if you showed that carving to someone with zero context, they'd probably say it looks like a dude in some sort of spaceship or something just advanced for the time. And then there's their obsession with the gods descending from the sky, often depicted with serpentine or bird-like features. Now, was this just fantasy, or were they actually recording encounters with beings from up in space? Their myths even mention beings known as the Star People, who supposedly came down to teach them wisdom. Some of their temples and pyramids also line up with stars and planets in a way that makes it seem like they knew way more about space than you'd think possible for such an ancient society. So were they just a highly advanced civilization, or did they have a little guidance from up above? Ancient Indian texts are full of wild descriptions of these flying machines called vimanas. These weren't just vague mentions of something flying through the sky. These texts go into crazy detail about the mechanics, the weapons, and even the fuel these crafts supposedly used. The Mahabharata and Ramayana talk about epic aerial battles, beams of light that could destroy entire cities, and weapons that sound suspiciously like modern day nukes. Now, of course, most people think these stories are just myths, but some believe they may have been describing real events, possibly involving extraterrestrial technology. And even stranger, some of these texts describe the Vimanas as being piloted by beings with godlike abilities, often descending from the heavens to interact with humans. Were these just religious visions, or did these ancient people have a more literal understanding of what was going on? Whether or not these texts are just stories, it's pretty cool that they sound more like science fiction than your more traditional mythological tales. The Inca built one of the most impressive empires in history, and they did it without the wheel, iron tools, or a writing system, at least not one we can fully understand. But their stonework is where things get really weird. Sites like Sacsayhuaman have massive, perfectly cut stones that fit together without mortar, almost like a puzzle. And some of these stones weigh over 100 tons, and we still don't know exactly how they moved and shaped them like that. Some say it was just good old-fashioned manpower and ingenuity, but others think they might have had some help. The legends of the Inca mention sky gods who came down and taught them knowledge. Were these just mythological figures, or could they have been something else entirely? The Dogon people of Mali have a knowledge of astronomy that's bizarrely advanced for a tribe that by all accounts shouldn't have had access to telescopes. Specifically, they've known about Sirius B, a white dwarf star invisible to the naked eye, for centuries. Western astronomers didn't confirm its existence until the 20th century, but the Dogon had detailed knowledge about it long before that. They claim they got this information from beings called the Nomo, amphibious, fish-like deities from the Sirius system, who came from the sky and brought knowledge. Again, this sounds a lot like extraterrestrial contact, but is it just a myth? Did they just figure out everything they know on their own? Or were they actually visited by beings from the Sirius system? China's mythology is full of sky beings, flying chariots and rulers who claim to be descended from celestial visitors. One of the most famous examples is the Yellow Emperor, who was said to have arrived on a flying dragon and later ascended back into the heavens. Then there are the carvings and artifacts showing figures with elongated skulls and strange non-human features. Some even resemble what modern UFO enthusiasts would call gray aliens. There are also ancient accounts of metallic flying machines, energy weapons, and even what some interpret as nuclear explosions in early Chinese texts. So, again, could these stories be describing actual encounters with extraterrestrials, or are they just highly exaggerated myths? Given China's long history and meticulous record keeping, it's not hard to wonder if some of these stories have more truth to them than we may think. Ancient Greece may not be the first place that comes to mind when thinking about alien contact, but their mythology, their advanced technology, it does make you wonder. The Greeks had gods and beings that descended from the sky, often in glowing chariots or surrounded by radiant light. You could interpret that as something of a UFO encounter. Take Prometheus, for example, who stole fire from the gods and gave it to humanity. Could this be a metaphor for advanced knowledge gifted to early humans by an otherworldly being? Then there's more concrete stuff like the Antikythera mechanism, an ancient analog computer discovered in a shipwreck. This thing was capable of things that wouldn't be matched for over 1,000 years. Where did the Greeks get this level of understanding? Was it purely because they were just that smart, or is it possible they had some divine inspiration, maybe from beings beyond Earth? Here's another strange little curiosity: accounts of flying shields seen in battle, reported by historians like Herodotus. Was this just dramatic storytelling? Or were ancient Greek soldiers actually seeing aircraft thousands of years before modern UFO reports? The Caral Supe civilization in Peru is one of the oldest in the Americas, dating back to around 3000 BCE. Yet they built massive pyramids, had complex urban planning, and even developed a mysterious form of record keeping using knotted strings. They seem to have done this with no outside influence, at least no influence that we know of. Unlike other ancient civilizations, the Caral Supe didn't leave behind a lot of warlike artifacts. Signs of massive conflicts, no battle records, just peaceful, advanced city building. Some researchers believe this points to them having had help from a superior intelligence that guided them toward a civilization focused on science and trade rather than conflict and power. There's also the uncanny similarity between their pyramids and those found in Egypt. How did these two civilizations, separated by thousands of miles, come up with the same type of structures? Was it just a coincidence, or were they both following the same blueprint, one that might not have originated on Earth? The Nazca people lived in what's now Peru between 100 BCE and 800 CE, and they left behind something that still baffles people today: these massive geoglyphs known as the Nazca lines. We're talking giant animals, humanoid figures, and geometric shapes all etched into the desert floor. The thing is, you can really only see them from way up in the air. And this is where the alien theories come in. Some believe the Nazca made these lines as messages or landing strips for extraterrestrial visitors. After all, why go through all that effort to make something you couldn't even fully appreciate from the ground? There's also the theory that the Nazca had help from advanced beings who guided them in creating these massive designs. Obviously, there are skeptics who argue that they were purely ceremonial or meant to be seen from surrounding hills, but the fact that some lines stretch for miles and form perfectly straight paths, it does make you wonder who or what were they trying to communicate with? Well, of course, no list of possible alien-influenced civilizations would be complete without ancient Egypt. The pyramids alone have had people speculating things for centuries. These massive structures are so precisely built that modern engineers still aren't completely sure how they were constructed. The Great Pyramid of Giza, for example, is aligned almost perfectly with the true north, and the measurements of its base are oddly connected to the dimensions of the Earth itself. Did the Egyptians really figure this out on their own? Or did someone or something give them the knowledge? Then there are these strange depictions in Egyptian art. Some carvings show beings with particularly large eyes, what look like advanced devices. Even more bizarre are the light bulb carvings in the Dendera temple, which some believe depicted electrical technology. Egyptian mythology also talks about the gods descending from the sky and sharing knowledge with humanity. Were these gods just myths, or were they actual beings from another world? If so, what was their purpose in guiding one of the most powerful civilizations in history? A long-lost Stone Age megastructure has just been discovered in Germany.
And a huge wall of skulls built by the Aztecs was found in Mexico City.
More on that right now.
A 115-foot tall, 40-foot wide wooden rack adorned with hundreds of enemy and sacrificial skulls. That is what would have greeted you if you had been unlucky enough as to stumble into the Aztec Cathedral in Mexico City sometime between 1485 and 1502. It is no secret that the Aztecs are an incredibly mysterious civilization known for their advanced architectural feats and aggression. But it wasn't until the discovery of the skull rack back in 2015 that historians realized just how proud the civilization was of their violent ways. The skull rack was found in the corner of a chapel in the Aztec capital. While many of the skulls were likely obtained through human sacrifice, others had a different origin. Historians believe that certain skulls, the ones bleached white for preservation, belonged to enemy warriors who were captured during battles and then killed. The combination of sacrificial and enemy skulls has led historians to believe that the rack is symbolic of the two most important aspects of Aztec life: spirituality and war.
News about a huge ancient wall discovered recently just came out in February. Off the coast of Germany, a long-lost Stone Age megastructure was spotted, and it may be the oldest in Europe discovered to date. In 2021, scientists on a research vessel found something surprising off Germany's Baltic coast, a submerged stretch of stones. And after checking it out, they think this could be Europe's oldest known man-made megastructure, which they've named Blinker Wall. The wall is believed to have been built by Stone Age hunters using it to catch animals. Blinker Wall is made up of over 1,300 stones and about 300 larger boulders, more than half a mile along the seafloor, and is nearly 70 feet underwater in the Bay of Mecklenburg, standing around 1.5 feet. It's believed to have been built around 10,000 years ago. The wall was likely built to guide and trap reindeer, which tend to follow straight paths in the landscape. When it was built, Blinker Wall would have been on dry land, running alongside a lake where reindeer gathered. The idea was to create an artificial bottlenecking, possibly with a second wall, or using the lakeshore to direct the animals towards the hunters. The crazy part is the wall was discovered purely by accident. Students were on a training exercise using sonar to map the seafloor about 6 miles off the German coast when they noticed a straight line of objects which turned out to be rocks. Other archaeologists arrived and determined that the wall was indeed man-made. It's the first Stone Age hunting structure that's ever been found in the Baltic Sea region.
Stonehenge is nothing compared to Superhenge. I mean, it's in the name. Just 3.2 kilometers or 2 miles away from the elusive Stonehenge lies Superhenge. Now, because of their close proximity and the similarity of the structures, including the fact that they are both comprised of the same stones, it is believed that they might be connected, but as we know nothing about how either of them came to be, there is really no way of knowing for sure. The two are estimated to have been built around the same time, somewhere between 3100 and 1600 BC, but unlike Stonehenge, which was discovered back in the 1620s, Superhenge, which is 15 times the size of Stonehenge, wasn't discovered until 2015, because the monument had somehow become buried underground along the Durrington Walls in Great Britain. Seeing as there are no records of either Stone nor Superhenge, and the fact that despite being discovered 400 years ago, we still have no idea what Stonehenge was used for, we have absolutely no clue what the purpose of Superhenge might be. But theories do include a burial monument, a meeting place for kings, some kind of astronomical computer, or even a way to communicate with other worldly beings. But I want to know, what do you think it is? Down below.
Nan Madol. This place is incredibly cool because it's an ancient city built on about 100 artificial islands connected by canals off the coast of Pohnpei Island in Micronesia. It's sometimes called the Venice of the Pacific. The city was constructed around the 12th century with islands being made by stacking huge stones to create walls and platforms. Nan Madol had temples, tombs, and living quarters for the rulers and priests of the time. The city was designed to impress and control, with the ruling class living on the islands and the common people living on the mainland. One of the most impressive structures in Nan Madol is Nandawas, a royal mortuary built with walls 25 feet high. The city started to decline around the 16th century, and by the time the Europeans arrived in the 1800s, Nan Madol was abandoned and overgrown. But it looks really pretty now.
1,420 years ago, an unknown ancient civilization managed to do something we couldn't even do today. Sometime between 536 and 600 AD, this mystery civilization managed to create a megastructure made out of magnetic stones that weigh about 131 tons each. For reference, modern-day earth-moving equipment can move between 7 to 120 tons, so 131 is really out of the question. So how the hell did whoever brought the stones of Puma Punku bring them up the Andes Mountains in Bolivia? Well, no one knows. We also have no idea how they managed to carve the stones into such precise shapes. It's an engineering mystery. And not only do we not know how Puma Punku was built, we also have no idea why, although theories suggest that the structures were used as spiritual and ritual centers. And of course there is the theory that the civilization who built Puma Punku were massive, highly intelligent humanoid beings that were often mistaken for aliens but actually originated on Earth before either leaving this planet or going extinct. But that one doesn't really fly in the scientific community. However, it's my personal favorite.
Found near the city of Cajamarca in northern Peru is a very fascinating archaeological site called Kumb Mayo. It is this intricate system of ancient stone canals, considered one of the world's oldest irrigation systems, dating back over 3,000 years. The canals stretch over 5.5 miles. There was advanced engineering skills at play here for sure. What baffles researchers is the precision of these canals, considering the challenging terrain of the Andes. The canals were designed with such accuracy that even today they still carry water from the Atlantic side of the Andes to the Pacific. You also have the stone forest, which is quite a sight. These are tall, upright limestone pillars, some reaching up to 60 feet high. There are also petroglyphs and carvings on some of the rocks at Kumb Mayo depicting animals, geometric shapes, and human figures.
20 famous massive stone sculptures carved into granite located in Japan with no known origin. So how did these monoliths come to be? Out of the 20 large stones, one stands out, Masuda no Inafune, which translates to the rock ship of Medusa. The structure is 11 meters long, 8 meters wide, and just below 5 meters high, and it weighs around 800 tons. No one knows why, when, or who built the structures found in the village of Asuka located in the Takachi district of Japan, and no one knows how they were made either. While some historians have put forth the theory that the stones might have been created by Buddhists in the year 538 due to the close proximity of the monuments to many Buddhist shrines and temples, the fact that the structures do not exhibit any Buddhist markers make the theory highly debated. As for now, the monoliths of Asuka remain pretty much a complete mystery, but I'm starting to think civilizations back in the day were just a hell of a lot stronger than civilizations today because we couldn't do it.
Markwasi is a little different from everything else on this list in that it's a natural formation. Or is it? High in the Andes Mountains near Lima, Peru is the plateau surrounded by a collection of massive granite rock formations. The location is famous for the mysterious shapes resembling human faces and animals carved into the rocks. The star of the show here is the assortment of large stone structures, some reaching up to 20 feet in height, sculpted apparently by natural weathering, but some of these formations look a lot like anthropomorphic figures, like faces, animals, even depictions of ancient deities. The interpretation of these shapes varies. Some think these were intentionally sculpted by an ancient advanced civilization, others say it's just pareidolia that we're looking at here, but a lot of scientists believe that the anthropomorphic shapes on Markwasi's rocks formed out of erosion processes with wind and water sculpting the granite over time, but I don't know. Looking at some of these formations, they look pretty uncanny to me. It's hard to believe that someone didn't intentionally do this.
Proof of aliens in the form of 24 coffin-shaped boxes discovered in a hillside cave in Saqqara located near the Great Pyramid of Giza. The boxes are solid Aswan granite and they have been cut flawlessly, a feat not only impressive in ancient times but equally as impressive today because, simply put, we do not have the technology to make such precision cuts in such a hard piece of stone. Not only that, but each box weighs around 100 tons and there are 24 of them. As of right now, no one knows why the boxes exist, what's inside of them, or the significance of there being 24 of them. The main theory of the boxes is, of course, that they were created by aliens. And then to go off of that theory, it's believed that the Egyptians built the structure around it where the boxes are now. At this point, I'm honestly tempted to believe this theory. Also, I'm incredibly curious to find out what's inside of these boxes. So if we do, expect a video on that.
Göbekli Tepe is an ancient archaeological site located in southeastern Turkey. It's considered one of the oldest known monumental structures in the entire world, dating back to around 9600 BC, which makes it over 11,000 years old. What's fascinating about Göbekli Tepe is that it was built by hunter-gatherer societies long before the advent of agriculture or settled communities. The site has a bunch of large circular and oval-shaped enclosures made of massive stone pillars. These pillars, some of which weigh several tons, are intricately carved with animals like lions and bulls, snakes, birds. Archaeologists believe that the place operated as a ceremonial or religious center rather than a place for people to actually live. It's thought that ancient people gathered here for rituals, probably involving feasting, dancing, and honoring their ancestors or gods. The place was deliberately buried around 8000 BC, or at least parts of it anyway, and possibly this was a ritual or to mark the end of its use. This turned out to be perfect though, because the burial ended up preserving this site remarkably well until it was rediscovered in 1994. Skinless horse demons, death spirits, ghouls that lurk in the shadows of your room at night.
These are 10 eerie legends from ancient civilizations.
Do you ever still have that small little voice in the back of your head warning you not to step out of bed late at night in case some ghoulish entity is waiting underneath to grab you by the ankles and drag you under? Tales of monsters dwelling in closets and under beds have been told since the dawn of time, across cultures all around the world. For Germans, the boogeyman is known as Bootsman. In some stories he appears as a goblin, in others he's a more formless, shadowy entity, but his purpose is always the same: stealing misbehaving youngsters. Parents would warn their young ones that if they didn't go to bed on time or got up in the middle of the night, they might get paid a visit from Bootsmen, who'd either crawl out from the closet or under their beds and whisk them away into the shadows, never to be seen again. Medieval style parenting at its finest.
Ancient Mesopotamia is known for being the birthplace of writing and subsequently recorded history. Its people, the Sumerians, also built the world's first cities and developed the oldest known political and administrative systems. While these advancements did and still do set the civilization apart from many others, it does not mean that they were exempt from the presence of haunting legends designed to understand the world and, in some cases, scare the younger generations. One example of this is Gidam, or the death spirit. In ancient Mesopotamia, it was believed that when a person died, they could still appear superior to the living in the form of a Gidim, so long as their remains were being taken care of by the living on Earth. The belief shaped the way Sumerians and other Mesopotamian civilizations cared for their dead. In order to maintain a connection to the Gidim of the deceased, they would adorn burial sites with offerings and gifts, which would allow the Gidim version of their loved ones to thrive in the afterlife. Graves left barren resulted in Gidims eating nothing but dust and becoming trapped in a sort of purgatory realm. The idea of mortality and life after death was as difficult then to comprehend as it is now, and so this ritual allowed the living to continue to care for their lost loved ones in the hopes of them one day appearing in the form of a Gidim, which could be called upon at any time with the use of a summoning ritual. Whether or not that ritual actually worked is an answer unfortunately lost to ancient history. Another legend stemming from the Sumerian civilization in Mesopotamia that supports the idea of Gidims is the legend of Enkidu, mythological wartime comrade and friend of Gilgamesh and the former king of Uruk. In the legend, Enkidu is dead, living inside of a rather desolate afterlife where he is being held prisoner. Knowing the fate of his friend, Gilgamesh prays for the release of Enkidu from the realm, a request granted by the sun god who returns Enkidu to Earth. When Gilgamesh asks about the afterlife, Enkidu begins describing his dreary existence of being deceased, forced to survive off dirt, and not being able to participate in adult activities. Don't know why he added that, but apparently it was important. But he continued on to say that the conditions varied and that they were actually dependent upon the life a person lived prior to their death. Those who had 7 or more children were quite comfortable in the afterlife because of the fact that they had plenty of living relatives supplying their grave sites with food and drink. Those who had less children had less comfortable lives, but were still nowhere near as uncomfortable as the childless, who were condemned to starve and endure everlasting loneliness. Furthermore, Enkidu described the differences in conditions for people who were kind in life and respected the teachings of their elders and those who were not, with those who were and did having quite comfortable afterlives and those who weren't and did not eating nothing but dirt and existing in complete isolation. I wonder what kind of person Enkidu was to earn himself such a negative experience in his, albeit brief, afterlife.
The Nuklave is a creature from Scottish folklore, specifically from the Orkney Islands. This thing is about as terrifying and gnarly looking as it gets. So imagine this horse-like demon with no skin, all its muscles and veins are exposed, and not only that, but it has this human-like torso growing out of its back. The two things are just kind of fused together in this fleshy monstrosity. The creature is said to be very tall and has a horrible decaying face. It lives in the sea or marshlands and comes out to cause trouble and spread disease. In some stories, it's responsible for droughts or crop failures as well. And people believe that if the Nuklave was near, it meant something terrible was going to happen to the land or to the people living there. One of the more chilling parts of the legend is that the Nuklave can control the weather. If it's angry, it can bring storms and make the sea rough, which was especially frightening back in the day for people who relied so much on fishing. The Amarok is a creature from Greenlandic Inuit mythology, and for a long time it was considered nothing more than a myth until an incident in the 19th century. In Inuit folklore, the Amarok is described as a giant wolf, renowned for its enormous size and strength. According to the tales, this wolf is said to hunt alone, especially at night, preying on those who violate traditional taboos or are foolish enough to be outside in the dark. In the 19th century, the perception of the Amarok actually changed from being nothing more than folklore to possible reality. So a creature fitting the description of the legendary wolf was shot, described as a truly immense pure white wolf. The hunter who killed the creature sent its pelt to the Copenhagen Museum in Denmark, and this was seemingly concrete evidence of the existence of a massive white wolf in the Arctic region. Now, whether this thing was actually the legendary Amarok or just an especially large wolf remains to be seen, but if you ever find yourself in Denmark, check out the museum for yourself. Maybe that pelt is still on display.
The tale of the Hagbui comes from ancient Icelandic and Norse folklore, civilizations that had a very different perspective on spirits and the afterlife. They believed that spirits did not ascend or descend to any kind of heaven or hell-like realms, but rather they remained in the bodies of the deceased until said bodies became disturbed. Because of this, ancient Nordics and Icelanders took great care and many precautions when burying their dead. Deceased members of the community were buried with their toes tied together and needles in their feet. Furthermore, because these civilizations believed that a deceased person could only enter a home from the door which they left, when the corpse was removed from a home, the entrance from which they left was promptly sealed up to protect against any kind of re-entry.
And now a creature from Zimbabwean folklore, the Kangamato. Descriptions of this creature vary somewhat, but most accounts agree that it's this big, nasty bird or bat with a wingspan that can rival your typical Cessna plane. Reports often mention a beak full of sharp teeth. It's usually depicted looking almost like a pterodactyl. Locals in Zambia and Zimbabwe have been talking about the Kangamato for ages. The name itself translates to breaker of boats in the local language, which doesn't exactly inspire warm and fuzzy feelings. One of the reasons this cryptid stands out is because it's not just something that lurks in the depths of some dense forest somewhere. No, instead the Kangamato supposedly likes to crash parties near rivers and lakes. It's said to have a thing for feasting on unsuspecting folks who dare to venture too close to the water's edge. So imagine trying to enjoy a peaceful picnic or a birthday party, and then suddenly you're in a scene from Jurassic Park.
The Japanese legend of Baku, the dream-eating spirit animal, has been around far longer than you or I. But unlike the subjects of all the other legends on this list, the Baku is actually a malevolent spirit that looks kind of like a tapir, a pig-shaped animal with a long snout, and this spirit eats nightmares. While this legend is incredibly popular in Japan, the story of the Baku actually started in China prior to the 14th century. And in some versions of this legend, in order to invoke the protection of the spirit, who has also been described as having the legs of a tiger, the head of an elephant, and the piercing eyes of a rhinoceros, one must draw a picture of the spirit before falling asleep. Now, after learning about all of these other haunted legends, I think I know what I'll be doing tonight.
The Kajanok is a cryptid creature said to inhabit the shallow bays and lakes of Greenland and the Canadian Arctic. It's described as a colossal aquatic arachnid, which certainly conjures up some pretty terrifying images. It's said to patiently wait for prey on the seabed near shoals and inlets, chomping at seals as they swim overhead. The giant sea spider depiction is often more common for the Canadian Inuit, drawing comparisons to the appearance of a huntsman spider, but on a much grander scale, obviously. A kayaker near Baffin Island in the early 20th century claimed to have witnessed this creature. Venturing into western Greenland, the Kajanok is described as more of a sea scorpion around the size of a rowboat. Lakes Natsilik and Umanak are said to be its home. Which version of this creature would you prefer to meet? Giant sea scorpion or giant spider? Take your pick. They're both bad, but I think a spider-looking thing would be much creepier to me.
And finally, we have the ancient Japanese legend of Nu, a mythical creature with the body of a tiger, the face of a monkey, and the tail of a snake, said to be the harbinger of sickness and bad luck. The Nu are not new at all. In fact, they are some of the oldest creatures described in Japanese legend, with some tales of the beast dating all the way back to the 12th century. In the tale of Heike, a Japanese story about the ancient 12th century war, the Nu was said to have visited the Emperor of Japan, who became ill not long after. Furthermore, after the visit, every time the emperor closed his eyes, he was bombarded with vicious nightmares. The ailments and torment continued until one day a brave soldier fired an arrow at the Nu and killed it. To this day, it's believed by some that the mound at the shore of the sea in Japan is the final resting place of the fearsome beast.